our speaker for today, who is Tall Paul. Tall Paul is an Anishinaabe and Oneida hip hop artist enrolled on the Leech Lake reservation in Minnesota. Born and raised in Minneapolis, his music strongly reflects his inner city upbringing, from personal expressions of self to thought provoking commentary on issues affecting Indigenous and diverse communities as a whole. Tall Paul's music evokes a wide variety of substance and soul. Thank you. Go ahead, please, Tall Paul.
Buju, Ginawa, Paul Indigenous, Gakabi Kang and Dunjaba, Minawa, Gazaga Squad, Jamaica, Nambini Gabi, Igaz, Dush, Wasazian, Dudane. My name is Paul. I'm born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, enrolled in the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and I'm of the Bullhead clan. And I am happy to be here today. I'm blessed and grateful to be here today to share this time with y'all. And I appreciate all of y'all being here as well. So from here, do I just kind of kick it off then?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. So, sorry, it's a little different. Like I see myself twice. All right. I'll just roll with it. So I guess my purpose here today is to inspire and motivate. So I like to tell people I'm a storyteller. I'm a natural storyteller. I find that it's in my blood as an indigenous person. Many of our native tribes are oral historians, and it's just in us to tell stories. I even find that it really expresses itself as an art form in my music, in my lyrics. I'm often telling stories. It's just what I gravitate toward naturally. So I like telling my story as well, just in speaking engagements and things like that. And I want to say that, when I speak on the ups and downs, I'm not bragging about my accomplishments, nor am I trying to like be a tearjerker when I'm speaking about the real life situations I've experienced and dealt with. Just know that I'm just really trying to inspire and just share my whole story and, keep it 100% real with y'all. And, if anybody's going through anything, hopefully my story can inspire people to know that, all things are temporary. Most issues are temporary. So, yeah, with that, I'll just kind of get to it. So, as I've said, I was born and raised in South Minneapolis. I'm an Indigenous hip hop artist. I was born to a young Native couple. They were Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. My dad is Leech Lake, Ojibwe. My mom is White Earth, Ojibwe. Both tribes are in northern Minnesota. I was born to these two young parents back in the 80s, 1987 to be exact. And I don't really recall my dad at that time. I seen pictures of me, sucking on his toes and things like that. I laugh at that. He was like around for like the first year or two of my life, but after that, he wasn't around anymore. He was very institutionalized, and many of these things are products of intergenerational trauma and the stripping of our languages and cultures. So that is something that has enabled me and empowered me to forgive him as his son. But anyway, I just wanted to make that note. But he was very institutionalized. He didn't have great role models. He himself did not have a good father. His father was this white guy. He was a Swedish guy, descendant of some immigrants, I think, who came here in the 1800s or something like that. And my dad tried to actually reach out to his father, and his father rejected him and said, what do you want? You want some money or something? Or what can I do for you? But he just kind of brushed him off. He was, I think, racist toward natives. He liked native women, but didn't want to deal with actually raising his native kids. So that was the situation that I learned about my father. But as I was saying, my father was institutionalized. He was not there for me. He was in prison. He spent much of his life in prison, spent much of his life, doing the wrong things, getting involved in the wrong activities. So I was not fortunate to grow up with my father, just like many people aren't. But anyway, so like I said, I didn't remember him. And my earliest memories were when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I remember like one thing that really caught me was education. I can really vividly see my two older brothers leaving for school on the first day of school this particular school year when I was about 5 years old, four maybe. And it just kind of hit me like, okay, I'm gonna grow up and be big like my brothers and go to school and stuff like that too. And I can really see that image in my head clear as day still to this day for some reason. And then on the flip side, one of my other earliest memories was, in general, my mom, her husband at the time was very abusive. Um, he would abuse her. He would physically abuse her, as well as mentally, emotionally, verbally. Um, he uh, he would whoop my older brothers and stuff like that. And it even came down to me. I was in general must have been too young because it didn't happen a lot with me. But one time in particular, I remember sitting at the breakfast table eating cereal, just kind of going to town on my cereal, and a fly landed in my milk. So I stopped eating, and he said, "Boy, you better eat that." I said, "No, there's a fly in there." He said, "I don't care. You better eat that." And I didn't do it. So he took my head and slammed it on the table, and he actually cut my cheek open, like not just my mouth, but like the scar. I forget which side it's on, but it actually cut like into my cheek and split my cheek. And that's one of the other early memories, and this kind of became a trend. I would have these positive memories, like we all do, but I would have these traumatic memories like many of us also have in our childhoods. And fortunately my mom left him. And speaking more so on my mom, she, just like my dad, did not have great role models, did not have good parenting models, did not have good, healthy relationship models to look up to as a child. She was raised by my grandma, who was also, dealing with these similar things, like I said, that draw all the way back into, colonization. These things that we experience as the indigenous people to this day are still rooted in colonization. So um, my mom didn't have the best knowledge or awareness of how to be in a healthy relationship. So she would often be in unhealthy relationships. And fortunately, she left him. That was my little brother and sister's father, that they divorced. And I went and moved in with my grandma for a while. We all did. And my grandma, she was like the chief of a tribe. She was like the chief of our tribe. She didn't play no games. She didn't take no BS from nobody. Um, and I remember as a kid, I used to like really resent my grandma because she was such a drill sergeant. But now, as I've gotten older, I realized why she was that way, and it was because she cared about us. She cared about us so much that she would take care of like three generations in our family under her. At any given time, there would be four generations in our household at a time, and she would take care of her grown adult kids who were in their 20s and 30s, as well as their kids, which was me, my brothers, sisters, my cousins, and so on, and then even some of their newborn babies. So she'd be having all of us in this house taking care of us at the same time, making sure we're fed, clothed, housed, and so on. So she was really about it, like she was about her family. She loved us, but being that situation was so stressful for her, she often expressed it through that frustration, and it was very focused on discipline, and disciplinary and authority. So there'll be times where I felt like I didn't do anything wrong and I would get in trouble. So I kind of developed a resentment for her, but I appreciate her now because I see what she went through for us. But anyway, in this environment at my grandma's house, I remember ashtrays, beer cans. I can smell that. Like I can still to this day remember that smell of like cigarettes being put out inside of beer cans and things like that. Just nasty smell. I remember like my cousin's boyfriends gang banging and like showing me guns in their bedroom and stuff like that. Um, seeing my cousin's boyfriends getting into fights with my uncle, stuff like that. Just a lot of different stuff, and my grandma, like I said, drill sergeant yelling around the house. Like it was just not a good. It was not an environment full of good vibrations. There was a lot of negative energy in that household, and I love my family. But I remember at a very young age, I was about 8 or 9 years old. I sat down on the couch on our porch one day, and I made a decision set in stone in my mind at that young age that I was going to be different from what was around me. And as funny as it may be, I was inspired by like the TV shows on television at the time, where I would see examples of, the happy-go-lucky, perfect family and whatnot, Brady Bunch, like all them happy-go-lucky sitcoms or whatever. I would see these examples of what we were not. And I would say, I want to be more like that, like the picket fence, the house, the parents are together, the kids are there, they even got a dog, everything's all jolly. And that's how I was like, I'm gonna strive to be as close to that as I can be, because I don't want to be what is around me right now. As much as I love my family, I don't want to live like this when I'm older. So I told myself, for one, I'm gonna be a good father, because I didn't have a father. And for two, I'm gonna be a good partner, because I seen how many negative relationships my mom had been in, like pretty much all of them. Um, and then for three, I was gonna do something with myself, like career wise. I wanted to go to college and build myself a career and do something that I love to do, because nobody in my family was doing that. There were some high school graduates, people working in general, but not even too many people in my family were working, and not too many were graduating high school. So that was the situation. So I told myself I was going to learn from their mistakes and do better. And then another big one was I was going to be sober. I told myself I'll never touch a bottle, I'll never touch alcohol or anything like that, because I see the damage it does around me. So essentially, I painted this picture of where I was going to fit into these shoes that were like goody two shoes, you know what I mean? Like I was going to be the perfect individual in my mind. And even though it didn't necessarily pan out that way 100%, it is what drove me to be who I am today. And it is the same drive that I still have to this day, both as an artist, as a father, as an entrepreneur, and so on and so forth. So we stayed with my grandma. I was with my grandma until I was about 9 years old. Moved back in with my mom. She was in another relationship with this guy named Terry. They were together for about a year or two, maybe. And we moved in with my mom, and it was cool. Like we lived there for like a year, but then he became abusive to my mom, and he hit her in the head with like a flower vase or something like that. And that was the tipping point for my mom. She, after that, was like, okay, this is done. Like she took us all, and we moved into this battered women's shelter called Eagles, Women of Nations Eagles Nest Shelter in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was a battered women's shelter for Native American women and their families who were escaping abusive men. So that was the situation. And, I guess just to lighten it up a little bit, we're living in this this shelter for families like ours. And it was actually a good time for me. Like I had fun there because we did different cool activities. Like they would take us on field trips. I remember like the chefs in that place allowed us to make our own pizzas. I think it might have been like my first time ever making my own pizza, from like the dough and putting the sauce and the cheese and all the toppings on it. Like that was fun. Went to, I think, my first sweat lodge, or no, first Sundance. I hadn't gone to the sweat lodge here, but I went to my first Sundance and kind of seen what it was. Um, and they had like little video game rooms and stuff. I remember being in there playing Nintendo, watching movies, stuff like that. And there was also like this little cute girl my age that we both kind of crushed on each other, another little native girl. And we actually kind of developed a friendship, well into our 20s. And we are about like 10, 11 years old, dated, throughout time and stuff. But made friends with that whole family. So there were some definite good experiences that came from living in this shelter. And one interesting thing that kind of taught me more about, I guess, spirits, what I thought of as ghosts as a kid. It was a strange experience for me at the time, but I remember all the residents of the shelter lived on the second floor of the shelter. And there was a third floor, which was all office cubicles, all, where the shelter staff did their business and stuff. And then there was the first floor, which was the common areas, the game room, the kitchen, in the main office and things like that. So all the family stayed on the second floor, and I remember when I was a kid, and I remember being in my bunk bed in our room. We had our own room, and I'm in my bunk bed, and I'm getting ready to go to sleep, and I hear like toy cars rolling around upstairs from us where all the office cubicles are, but it's like 11 p.m. and nobody's up there at night. The staff are gone, like majority of the staff are gone and stuff like that. So I was like, Ma, why do I hear cars rolling around? Like it sounds like toys are rolling around upstairs. And she's like, oh, those are spirits, just kind of straight nonchalant. Told me like those are spirits. This used to be a orphanage in like the early 1900s. So I guess um, uh, unfortunately, youth 100 years ago had probably passed away there. So it's a different experience. It was a powerful experience, and overall, like I honestly had a good time at this shelter. They were very supportive of Native women and their families. So moving from there, um, me and my siblings and my mom, she moved us up to this small town called Redwood Falls, Minnesota. And this was honestly probably like the best couple years of my childhood. Redwood Falls, Minnesota was probably the best couple years of my childhood. I remember, and then I'm sorry if people are like asking questions and stuff. I'll definitely answer those after I'm done kind of giving my general speech. But we moved up to Redwood Falls, Minnesota. It's a small town of like a population of 2,000 at the time, anyway. And we moved into these nice townhomes, and I think we moved there because my older brother's father lived there nearby. So we moved there to get away from the city, but also to reunite my older brothers with their biological father, who they had not known very well, and they were able to develop a relationship with their dad as a result. And made a lot of friends. I was like the new kid in town. Like I remember it was a cool experience, kind of like similar experience to that shelter. I had just a lot of positive experiences here. We moved into these nice townhomes, made a lot of friends, played a lot of football. Is something that you'll know about me is I'm a huge sports fanatic. Not as much today as I was when I was a kid, but played a lot of football. We'd have like 10-on-10 games of football. I remember breaking my thumb in the mud and just keep going at it because we loved it. We were passionate about football and sports. So like there'd be like those were the best times, was when we would have like 10-on-10 games in the rain, in the mud, falling and breaking bones and stuff, but we loved it. And then I remember going to school, and I was like the new kid in town, and I guess I kind of had the benefit of being the new kid in town. All kind of girls my age were crushing on me. I was like the new cute kid in town, and that felt pretty cool. You know what I mean? So there were multiple reasons that I liked this place, and most importantly, it was like the most normal my family life had ever been. My mom was not in a relationship, and like I said, all of her relationships, from my experience when I was a kid, were like exclusively bad relationships. So it was a positive that she wasn't in a relationship. She was more focused on just parenting, and all of me and my siblings were all living there together, except for my oldest brother. He was in juvenile detention for some mistakes he had made when he was a teenager. I think he shot a gun at my uncle or something like that. And he ended up getting out after like 5 years and actually moving into Rebel Falls with us, and got back on his feet, got reacclimated to society and things like that. But so it was the most normal my life had ever been. And that was the main thing that was so powerful for me. That's why I say it was like the best couple years of my childhood. Like me and my siblings all actually lived together. My mom was there, and there was no abusive male in the situation. So I was just grateful for that. And then these 2 years went really well. They went really well. And then toward the end of these 2 years there, I'm about 12 years old, and I became aware of my mom's drug addictions and her alcoholism. And these were things that she kept shielded from us. And really, I think she might have been sober for a while or something, because it had never been exposed to me, especially not like the hard drugs that she was getting involved with at this time. So I remember going to school one day, and prior to this, she would like disappear, so it kind of built up, and she started disappearing from home longer and longer. Like she would say she was going to work but not come back for a week or maybe days or even a couple weeks. She said, "Oh, I had to stay at work, this, that, and this," and I didn't know any better but to believe her at the time because I hadn't known about her addictions. But anyway, she came back home one time, and I got home from school one day, and she was in the bathroom, and she stayed in that bathroom all the way until the next morning when I had to leave school again. And I remember bugging out, like, why is she doing this? And I got home the next day from school as well, and she was still in there. So she was in there for more than 24 hours straight. And I had no clue what was going on. And then my older brothers got home. They're like 16 and 18 or 19 at the time. And they already knew because they had been through it with her before, and they were aware. So they're like, "Oh, she's been in there for more than a day." Oh, they already knew. So they kicked the door in, and I seen my mom, and I seen her like I never seen her before, and she just did not look like herself, and it was new to me. And from there, it just started a downward spiral just kind of kicked off from that point. Um, there was a lot of her leaving, not being there for us. I started having to take care of my little brother and sister by myself for days at a time. And then we eventually got into foster care. We got put into foster care as a result. So one night my mom left, and she said she was going to the casino with her friend. They're supposed to come back. They never did. And we were actually at her friend's place, and I was watching my little brother and sister as well as her friends, one or two kids, I forget. They were two youngsters, and I was about 12 years old at the time. And I'm watching all these kids, and my little brother and sister, man, I think back like I was a knucklehead, but my little brother and sister were like 6 and 8 years old, and we lived about a mile. We were about a mile from their school. We didn't live a mile from their school. The place we were at was about a mile from their school, but this is back in like the '90s, like late '90s, and it was kind of different for kids back then. We did a lot of roaming on our own. I wouldn't trust that today with my own children, but um, we did a lot of roaming. We knew this town well. We lived there for 2 years. So even though they were 6 and 8 years old, they knew how to get to school. And I knew that, and we didn't have a bus there. So I was like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm sitting there trying to get a hold of my mom. I was like, well, you guys just go to school. And so they walked to school, and I, like I said, I look back and I think like, man, what a knucklehead I was to actually send them to school at those ages. I couldn't imagine doing that today with how crazy the world is. But anyway, they left for school, and about 10, 15 minutes later, they got as far as the bridge in this town that crosses over to the other part of town where their school was, and cops picked them up, brought them back to this town home where I was at, and where they had left from, and said, "Hey, what's going on here? Why are these two youngsters, walking to school by themselves?" I was like, "Oh, well, I sent them to school because my mom was supposed to come back home last night, but she didn't." And he was like, "Oh, okay, well, is there an adult anywhere?" I'm like, "No, but I can call my older brother." They're like, "All right, yeah, you do that. You get an adult here, and then we'll be good to go, whatever." And we're in a small white town, so I kind of chalk this up to like a racist situation because they told me, call your older brother here, and if he's an adult, we'll be good to go. We'll take off, and y'all can figure it out, whatever. Well, anyway, my older brother gets there to take care of us, and they took us anyway. They took me and my little brother and sister, threw us in a squad car, and took us off to foster care, and we got put in the foster home that same day. And I just remember it being a very traumatic experience. I've never experienced anything like that, just being stripped out of my family's life and put abruptly into a white foster home out in the country. Like it was crazy. Um, like straight up hillbilly. Like I mean, and I do say that to be kind of humorous, looking back on it, it is a funny situation, but at the time it was traumatic. But I mean, like they burnt their trash and rusted out barrels in the backyard. You know what I mean? Like it stunk like manure. You know what I mean? Like it was straight up like farm life, hillbilly type stuff. I walked in the garage and they had like 20, 24 packs of Mountain Dew. And sure enough, you know, the man of the house was like this big, heavy set, 350-pound guy with overalls on, you know what I'm saying? So it was like, I gotta plug my phone in real quick. So it was very like stereotypical hillbilly life. And we got put into this family's home. And I knew right away, like, they don't care about us. Like, they probably do this foster care thing for money or something. They didn't treat us like they cared about us. Like the man of the house would make my little sister sit on his lap at the dinner table. Um, and I started taking note, and I was like, I mean, I remember I was bawling my eyes out in my bed at night at this foster home that first night, you know, and just like, oh my God, like the experience was rough. So I started taking mental notes of all the things that was wrong with this place, such as, you know, making my little sister sit on his lap at the dinner table. I knew that wasn't right. One time, me and my little brother were playing basketball out in the driveway, and the basketball bounced off the rim that they had there and hit their son's truck. And their son was an adult, like in his 20s, and he came out just as the ball hit his truck, and he said, "You ever hit my truck again, I'll kill you." Straight up said that to me and my little brother. We're like 12 and 8 years old. So we just was like, whoa, you know, we walked inside after that, and we didn't play basketball out there no more. And then down in the basement, they had like cases with, um, they had like open gun cases with accessible firearms, ammo just literally laying around on the floor, like super, like not safe, you know what I mean? And I'm a Minnesota permit to carry instructor now, so I'm a little bit knowledgeable about that stuff. And I'm thinking back on that, like how unsafe that was to be a foster parent and you have accessible firearms and ammo all in the same area, just laying around. So I took note of all these things and I gave this information to my social workers and my family members. And we ended up getting taken out of that home. And I believe they lost their foster license. And, you know, kind of make a long story short, from that point on, we bounced back and forth between different foster homes, group homes, different family members, cousins, brothers, my mom's house sometimes, my grandma's house sometimes, aunts, uncles, and so on and so forth. We pretty much bounced between all these things for like the next, you know, years. For me, it was like age 12 all the way until I aged out at 18. And for my little brother and sister, it was from, you know, the age they were at until about 4 or 5 years later when they moved in with their dad in Las Vegas. He got custody of them and brought them out to Las Vegas in Nevada, where they kind of spent their early teens anyway, and early adolescence. So that was kind of my situation. You know, I was bouncing around these different foster homes, having a multitude of different experiences, some positive, mostly negative, you know, living in oftentimes, you know, homes with people who just didn't really care, you know, and that was it. And because of this, because of this, I started to develop a resentment from my mom. And again, like going back to the whole understanding the root of why we deal with the things we deal with today as Indigenous people, I was able to find forgiveness from my mother as I got older. But at the time, I didn't understand these things. So I started developing resentment from my mom. Like, how could she do this? You know, like she cares about her boyfriends more than us. She cares about her drugs and alcohol more than us, which I also know was not true because I myself had eventually become addicted and, you know, alcoholic. So I know that struggle. And I know for a fact, even though I was myself making similar mistakes in my early teens and early 20s when I became a father, I wasn't the best father to my son, but that didn't mean that I cared more about alcohol than I cared about my son. Is just addiction is a disease that is so powerful over the mind. And people who don't deal with it cannot even speak on it. I know a lot of times they'll try to speak on it and say, oh, it's just a choice. Nobody chooses to be addicted. You can choose to like use a drug or something for the first time, but after that, when it takes hold of you, it takes hold of you. So, and it doesn't happen to everybody, obviously. But anyway, I learned as I got older to forgive my mom. But because I was young, I developed resentments for her. I already had resentments from my dad. So I became like, started to fill up with anger and moving around so much. I ended up going to like 25 to 30 different schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, and developed a very like strong introverted approach to life. I became very introverted, whereas before I was very, comfortable with speaking and, sociable and so on, even happy go lucky, cracking a lot of jokes and stuff. But this really kind of dulled all of that, kind of dulled my light as a youngster. And I just became introverted and angry, and which ultimately led to me falling into the same things that I always said I wouldn't fall into. So when I was about 14, 15 years old, I gave into this struggle of addiction and things like that, when I had said that I never would. And very quickly it got me. I remember having blackouts from the get-go from alcohol. I remember smoking a lot of marijuana stuff, doing some different types of pills and things like that. And I just fell into it head first. It was like an escape, I think. And in the process, I think it might have been right around the time I started doing all of this. I picked up a pen and pad for the first time, and I started airing out my emotions, rapping one day. I just randomly sat down. I was living with my mom at the time, and I just randomly sat down. I was like, I'm gonna write some raps. I think I'm gonna write some raps. So I started writing raps. And my influences at the time were like, I would see my older cousin recording raps into a tape recorder. I remember watching 106 in Park Freestyle Fridays on BET. And I remember this Asian cat named MC Jin going in there, and he was just like bodying people that he was battling on these 106 in Park Freestyle Friday shows. I remember I'd be like pumped to get out of school on Fridays to go home and watch 106 in Park Freestyle Fridays and watch these battles. And he was just bodying dudes on this stage every Friday for like 6-7 weeks, and then it ultimately resulted in him signing a deal with the Rough Riders, like DMX and Jadakiss and all those guys. I was like, dang man, if an Asian dude can do it, I could do it as a native. So that inspired me, because when you think of hip hop artists, you don't typically think of native rappers or Asian rappers and so on and so forth. So that inspired me in that way. And then plus one of my older brothers had friends who were local MCs in the Minneapolis hip hop scene. So those were kind of my influences at a young age. So I just kind of stuck with it, kept writing raps, kept showing them off to my friends. And it was just a hobby, and I even did that while I was, making the poor decisions I was making. So basically age 14, 15 is when I started doing that and getting into the wrong things. And that lasted throughout high school, and it affected my education. I started skipping a lot of school. I think um, I missed out on a lot of credits and got a lot of bad grades. My GPA dropped to like below 2.0, less than a C average. Whereas before I was averaging like a B, I think, or maybe even a B plus, like ninth grade through halfway through 10th grade before I got into all this stuff. But come senior year, my GPA was like 1.96, and I wanted to try out for football. I was like, because everything I was into, I had never played football for high school. My ninth grade year, I played for a park board league in the oldest age group, which was 13 to 15 years old. But by the time sophomore year came around, I was already into these wrong things. So 10th and 11th grade, I didn't play football for high school. Senior year came around, I'm like, man, I want to give it a shot because I know my athletic abilities, stuff like that. And the athletic director was like, I'm sorry, but you have a 1.96 GPA. You need a 2.0, so you can't play. And that taught me a lesson. That kind of instilled that activated my work ethic. Like, all right, man, I'm not about to like not graduate high school. But meanwhile, I was still making these poor decisions. And to kind of fast forward through this, basically, I went to summer school before my senior year. I enrolled in these double credit classes. There was a program where you could take a couple double credit courses where you would get 2 credits instead of 1. And by the end of my senior year, and I was also staying behind. I was staying after school for about 2 hours a day, about 3 days a week, my whole senior year. And at the end of my senior year, I graduated on time. And I applied to college at the University of Minnesota. with the help of my advisor. And I got home one day to my auntie's where I was living with my auntie on my dad's side for like the last year and a half of my teenage years, I should say, like 16 and a half until 18. And I seen this thin letter from the U of M. I was like, oh, okay, like they rejected me, it's cool, whatever. I opened it up, and sure enough, it said, we're sorry to inform you, you didn't get in. So I didn't even get down about it because I didn't expect to get in. So I went back to school and I notified my advisor who had helped me apply. I was like, I'm just going to apply to MCTC, the technical college that was in town. And she was like, no, and she was like, F that, she was fired up. She's like, F that, we're gonna do an appeals. And I'm like, whoa, you're the boss. All right, she's like, we're gonna do an appeal based on extenuating circumstances. She knows everything I'm telling y'all. So she knows that I was a bright student before I started making these mistakes. And she's like, she knew the adverse effects of my reality, I guess I could say. So we did this appeal based on extenuating circumstances resulting, from my experience in foster care and so on and so forth. And, I get home one day again, 2 weeks later or something, and this is toward the end of my senior year. I get home to my aunties and I see this big, thick letter from the University of Minnesota. And I'm like, I know they didn't send me this fat letter. It was like it was like as thick as a notebook. I'm like, I know they didn't send me this just to tell me no. And I already knew, but I sat down and I braced myself and it said, congratulations, Paul Winnell Jr., you've been accepted to the University of Minnesota. And I just remember feeling like overpowered with joy. I was like, wow, I'm a first generation college student. Nobody in my family has done this. But because nobody in my family had done this, this was not the norm for me. So I felt like I already made it. I'm 18 years old, naively thinking like, okay, I'm set for life. I'm in college, like I'm good. And quickly I realized that that wasn't the truth. I actually ended up almost I almost lost college because of my behaviors. I was still partying and stuff. I basically became a functioning alcoholic and addict. I would go to school and get my work done and do what I had to do. But outside of that, I was still partying. And that was the case when I got into school. So then I got into the U of M. Like the second semester in my sophomore year, I met my son's mom and we kind of fell for each other very quickly. She was from Standing Rock, and we both grew up with similarities such as not having good role models and examples of like how to parent, how to be a healthy individual, and so on. So our relationship quickly went downhill. We probably should have split up like 3 to 6 months into our relationship. That's when it kind of started getting really unhealthy. But we stayed together because we were codependent. And the blessing that arose from it was our son. It was a sophomore year, second semester sophomore year, almost end of my sophomore year, we found out that she was pregnant. And then that kid came back into my head when I was 7, 8 years old saying like, I'm gonna be this, I'm gonna be that. I'm like, okay, I always told myself I'm gonna be a good father. So that kind of reinvigorated that in my mind. Like, okay, now I'm actually gonna be a dad. So I need to actually be a good father. And the power of addiction and alcoholism had such a grasp on me that when my son was born in February 2008, I still was not able to just abruptly cold turkey get off the drinks and get off of whatever else I was doing. Like it was not that easy. And it was a very powerful experience seeing my son born. I remember I would speak to him through the womb, like I would speak to him through his mother's tummy, because I had read somewhere that, if you speak to your baby while they're in the womb, they will recognize your voice. So I wanted to make sure that he didn't only recognize his mom's voice, but also recognize mine. So I spoke to him all the time while he was in there. I would comfort him while he was in there. And when he was born, they brought him to the nursery and he was bawling his eyes out, and his mom couldn't be there because she had just delivered him C-section. So they're like sewing her up and things like that. And she's dealing with that. So I was able to go to the nursery and calm him down. I remember he was just bawling his eyes out, and I went into that nursery and I just whispered in his eyes. And as soon as he heard me, he just like shut up instantly and just like stopped crying. It was like it was a terrible scream. Like I felt so bad for the way he was crying and screaming, and he just instantly got silent, and that was so powerful. But not even that was enough for me to just be like, oh, I'm just done. I'm done drinking. I'm done doing everything. Like that is the power of addiction that I experienced. So my son is about 8 months 8 months old, and I ended up having a blessing in disguise. By this point in time, I had been to jail a handful of times due to my um, use and abuse of alcohol and drugs and things like that. And I had a blessing in disguise in which one night I went to jail, and I remember coming to. I think I was actually blacked out when I went to jail. I remember coming to and realizing I was in this jail cell, and I thought to myself, this was my first time being in jail while my son was actually born and alive out of the womb with us. And I was like, man, I've become just like the person I always said I would never be. I don't work. I'm using and abusing alcohol and other drugs. Um, I'm skipping a lot of school, making excuses for why I'm not turning in assignments. I don't have my own name on the lease of anywhere. Like, I'm living with my cousins at the time. So, and technically, I mean, if your name's not on a lease, you're homeless. You know what I mean? And so, not that anything's wrong with being homeless. There's a huge issue with that in this country that could easily be solved. But could easily be solved with all the like financial resources that the elite people in this country have that they don't choose to use to help people who need it most. But anyway, I'm essentially homeless. The only thing I got going for myself is college, and I'm not being a great father. I'm not being a great partner to his mom. I became my dad essentially, and I became the person that I said I would never be. So that hit me hard. And I remember being in that jail cell, and I shed some tears, and I cried a little bit like, man, I gotta change. And when I went to court the next day, the judge told me, like, we are gonna release you conditional upon you following these probation requirements of taking UAs, proving that you've stayed sober. You need to engage in these positive activities and so on and so forth. I was like, all right, that was kind of like the kicking the butt I needed. So I got sober, and when I got sober, I needed to find something to fill my time, and I already had that hobby and passion of writing rhymes. So I was like, I'm gonna pursue hip hop. I'm gonna start rapping for real, and I started reaching out to local hip hop artists, local producers, got studio time, heard my voice on record for the first time, and was fired up. Showed it off to my family. I felt like I was the stuff. And I did my first open mic, and you got to remember, I was like the quietest kid in my whole high school, literally, and there's 2,000 kids in my high school. And I just remember, like, one of these local MCs was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is dope, you're making some pretty good music for a beginner, but if you really want to be about this, then you need to get out and do shows and actual performances. And I'm like, I took that as a challenge. Like, I ain't about to be no MySpace rapper. You know what I mean? Like, I ain't gonna just be no internet rapper, whatever. Like, I ain't gonna act scared of performing on stage. So I did it. And I did it as like a highly introverted person. And I was so nervous. And I got on that stage for the first time, and this is voices merging open mic at the University of Minnesota in an auditorium in front of like 200 people. And I just faced that fear, man. I took that leap of faith. They called my name up. Even I was having thoughts like, man, I could just walk out of here. I don't gotta do this. I don't gotta perform. I could just bounce. That was my fear speaking. But I stayed. I forced myself to stay. And they called my name. Tall Paul, come to the stage. So I was like, all right. And got down there. And sure enough, I had some slip ups. I started rapping so hard that I ran out of breath because I had no conceptualization of breath control and how to manage that as a performer. So I ran out of breath, which caused me to then start forgetting some rhymes. And after that, I was like, I kind of had this thought in my head, instant thought. And I'm like, sorry, my dog's kind of in here messing with me right now. But I had this thought, like, it can't go no worse than this. Like, I need to pick up on my bars and get through the rest of this song strong. So I I started looking up at the crowd, whereas before I was kind of looking down a little bit, gazing downward toward their feet a little bit. You know, I started looking up a little more, started moving around more while I was on stage, whereas before I was being a little stiff and standing still. And I just finished it out with confidence, and I did good for like the last half of the song, basically. And after that, you know, I realized like, okay, I can do this. You know, like I can do this. Facing that fear that one time, that one single time. And many of y'all may notice, you know, facing that fear that first time helps you to realize that that fear is not justified, that you can do it. Like my son, for example, he chose to get into boxing. I told him to pick a sport. He got into boxing. He said, I want to do boxing. I was like, all right, cool. And he recently he had his first fight like right before the pandemic started, you know, and he was super nervous, and I could tell. And I just reinforced it to him, like, hey son, I'm proud of you no matter what happens, you know, like you stepping in that ring is something that most people would not do, you know, like you are facing your fear. And I'm proud of you no matter how good of a performance or bad of a performance you give. Like there is no loss, there is only growth, there is only doing what you can to be better. And he actually did win his match. And that's that power of positive reinforcement coming from a father, I think. And that is why I was so inspired to be a good father, because I didn't have that as a child. But, you know, graduated college 2010. Now I am a full-time father, full-time self-employed artist, also crossing into other endeavors, entrepreneur. I'm in the best relationship I've ever been in. My son lives with me full time. And everything's not perfect, you know, like life is still life. Like I'm actually dealing with a personal situation right now that's kind of got me a little on edge lately for about the past month. Not gonna get too deep into that, but I mean, like life is still life, and I'm learning more and more. I just gotta always stay as positive as possible. For me, sobriety is not enough. I've been sober 11 years, but I know that I can be just like the person I was when I was using if I'm not staying grounded and staying rooted in my spirituality. Like I know I need to be praying and meditating every day. I need to be focused on what I can give to the world as opposed to what I can take from it. Because I did a lot of taking, and all that was taking one step forward to take 3 steps back. But when I give, I realize that it comes back tenfold. It's like life just blesses you when you bless the lives of others. Life is really all about what I can do for others to make their lives easier. And just as a positive reinforcement, karma, whatever you call it, it comes back to me tenfold, and amazing things happen in my life, such as being able to be here with y'all today. And being sober for 11 years and so on and so forth. So that's where I'm at today. And from there, I will just say thank y'all again for having me. This ain't over yet. I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. I have not yet done this in this particular format where like I see the Q&A stuff up here, but I'm going to do my best. Either Edward can help me with the Q&A as he sees your questions, or I can try to figure it out as well.
Yep. So far, we have one comment. This is from Mayhay here. Says, it's not a question. You tell my story and yours. You're reminding me how much I want to be home with my community. I am so thankful to hear your story. So yeah, and I think we have some questions rolling in. And while we do, I'll ask one question. How do you see, or how did your identity as a native young man develop in these foster homes and that kind of stuff? How did your identity grow or not grow? Or is there any point in time where it did grow, or how did that work, I guess?
So I would say like the best experience I had as a young Indigenous boy in foster care was when I lived in this group home called Andai Young. It was 4 Native kids, and they would take us on a lot of like cultural field trips. They would do smudging and things like that with us. So they instilled a lot of Native values in that program for the kids who live there. So that would bring in like drum and dance teachers that would take us to drum and dance classes. They would bring in different guests, maybe language speakers, stuff like that. And we were just around other Native kids the whole time, and that was like very unique because even though they have this thing called the Indian Child Welfare Act, where you're supposed to be placed with Native families, there aren't enough Native foster parents out there for all Native kids to be placed with Native families. There are probably far too few actually. So that was a unique experience because the majority of my time in foster care, I was not in places that grew my Native identity. But I would say Andai Young did, and that was a. I actually don't live too far from there right now. I live like half a mile from there right now, coincidentally. But yeah. So that was my experience.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'll also say thank you for sharing your story in general with us. It's fantastic and very candid. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure all of the viewers appreciate that as well. We are getting some more questions here. So I'll ask you some others. We have one here. From your experience, how do you deal with pressures and anxieties, making sure not to turn to drugs and alcohol?
Um, so I know early on in my sobriety, it really came down to me going to a lot of meetings, reaching out to my support systems, because like the as much as I say sobriety time isn't as important as the quality of sobriety. When you're early in sobriety, it is really all about getting through that next day and that next day and that next day. You know, like if you're struggling, like it's really all about. For me, it was really all about making sure I was smudging and praying every day, asking, and everybody may not believe, you don't gotta believe in like the creator or God or anything. It could be like a concept, like I believe in love, you know what I'm saying? Like, um, you could like speak to yourself, like I'm just gonna, try to be more about love today, and that cannot involve me using because I know that that's not good. Like I am not a loving person when I'm using. So, for me, facing those troubles early in sobriety, it was key for me to stay really connected to my support systems, which a lot of that was like going to meetings, um, stuff like that, going to meetings, calling people who were on the contact lists in those meetings, other people, having like a sponsor is what they call it, somebody I could meet up with and read the literature with. Anything around sobriety and like those 12-step programs and stuff like that at the time were very key for me, as well as like cultural things like going to sweat lodges. I would go to sweat lodge once a week. Um, and I knew people who were native that were sober too, which definitely helped. So yeah, for me, it was just staying connected to my support systems was major. And now at this point, 11 years sober, I know for me, I'm never going to use again. Like I can definitively say that. And there are a lot of times when people will say like, oh, I mean, and it's true, like people with 25, 30 years sober relapse. But I just know that I'll never do it again. Like I'll never do it again. And to get back to the point is, like I said, sobriety itself is just not enough. So the way I keep myself from falling back into those thoughts is by meditating every day as much as possible. I find other positive things to engage myself. Like I exercise 5 times a week for at least like an hour to 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm engaged with my music. I'm engaged as a father. Um, I'm pursuing these different entrepreneurial endeavors. I have my significant other. So I have so much positive things to fill my time that it really keeps me from having those types of thoughts. And again, it's not perfect. It's not that I don't have negative thoughts. It's just I don't have those crazy thoughts that tell me like, oh, I want to go back to drinking because like, yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. And a big part of that is because I am engaged in so many positive things.
Great, great. Here's another question we have is I saw some freight train graffiti in an earlier video of yours. How has that culture influenced your art or life more broadly? I know Minneapolis graffiti culture is deeply rooted.
If I'm being completely honest, like I haven't been too immersed into like the graffiti aspect of hip hop. Like, you know what I mean? Like I never myself did graffiti. I've been around a lot of graffiti artists and things like that, and I appreciate it. Like it's really dope, but I myself have never been like super immersed into graffiti culture. Um, I've just always been like focused on the MCing thing so much, you know, and that's kind of surrounded myself with MCs, producers, like the musical aspect, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's think it's definitely dope, but I was never like super influenced, I guess, or immersed into it.
Okay, fantastic. We have another question here. How would you define hope? Because throughout your story, sounds like you experience a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, hope is kind of like that. I don't know. They always say like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Hope is the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. No matter how good or bad life is going, I know that life could always be improved. And I think hope is major, you know, the purpose of life. I feel like a big purpose of life is believing that life can get better and that there's something to look forward to and keep living for, and not only living for, but striving for and working towards. So that's what hope is for me. It's like that light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. We have another question here. Several Indigenous writers have talked about the evolution of ceremony, being able to find ceremony in contemporary things. We draw on many traditional ceremonies for healing and growth, but can you talk about what you personally derive from your art and the process?
Yeah, so I just know that when I'm writing, when I'm in my zone as an MC, as a writer, it's like I'm completely shut off to the world, whether, you know, it's the problems or whatever's going on, you know. Writing and activating my art brings me into my own space, my own zoned out space in my own head, you know, where everything's just good. Everything's positive. I feel good. I forget about my problems if I have any, you know. That's how it is ceremony for me, is it brings me contentment and peace in the moment. And really, I think in my experience, you know, when we have peace, it's because we are in the moment and we are appreciating all that is right in that exact moment. You know, we're not looking in the past, we're not looking too far ahead. I feel like for me, you know, looking too far ahead, looking in the past can kind of bring depression, bring anxiety, and it can bring hope as well. But yeah, I think for me it's ceremony. My art is ceremony because it just brings me into my own little world where I'm engaging myself. I'm using my voice to speak and amplify my voice and empower myself.
Okay, fantastic. Have another question here. So it sounds like when you first started rapping and writing rhymes, your goal was kind of to find an outlet for what you were experiencing and feeling. What would you say your goal is now with your music? What end do you have for your music now?
I think my goal now for my music, I think my primary thing is just staying true to who I am and educating. I want to use my music as an educational vehicle to, you know, educate on things like financial literacy. Like I've been thinking about doing some music about financial literacy and stuff like that because it's not really present in the Native community, and we suffer from that lack of knowledge and that lack of financial literacy. So a major thing is like using it as an educational vehicle, but it'll always, you know, one of my main goals will always be expression of self and showing appreciation for the things that have inspired me in my life. Like I'm working on an album about Jim Thorpe, and and the reason is because when I learned about him, I became inspired, um, very strongly inspired and motivated, not only as like a young Native athlete when I was a kid, but also just as a Native person in general. You know, because for those who don't know, Jim Thorpe is, you know, considered one of the world's greatest athletes of all time, and he was a Native man from Oklahoma, Sac and Fox. So he was Olympic gold medalist, NFL Hall of Famer, Major League Baseball player, amongst other things. So that very strongly inspired me. And so those are my goals, is to just, express myself, express my appreciation for the things that have helped me in life, express, my feelings if I'm feeling a certain way. A lot of it is just expression, but also using it as an educational vehicle, because I want to educate people on Jim Thorpe and his legacy as well.
Thank you. Question also, you said you enjoyed playing football quite a bit when you were a younger man. What position did you play?
Oh, so I was like all across the offensive line and defensive line. Like I played every position on the line basically, because
Okay.
I was a pretty big boy when I was younger.
Okay.
And I still, yeah.
Okay. And then is there any chance you're going to make a run at the XFL or try to try out for any team?
Oh, no.
All right. Some more questions rolling in here. What entrepreneurial endeavors are you interested in, if you can speak to them?
So like I spoke a little bit about like the financial literacy thing. Like I hope to develop my financial literacy knowledge to an extent where I am able to not only like rap about it, but also just to be able to teach it, and to make a living in doing so somewhat, so that is one thing I'm interested in, is financial literacy, because it is so lacking in the Native community. And I recognize, I feel like part of the reason is because we have a negative relationship with money. There has been so much done wrong to our people in the name of money and capitalism that we have a negative perception of it. But what I've realized is like we're still here living in America, in capitalism America. You know what I mean? Like either we are going to stay down and keep getting preyed on and keep being hand-fed handouts and things like that, and not ever self-sustain, or we are going to activate ourselves and start developing businesses and taking our own piece of that pie. Like that's the way I see it. And so that's what I'm on, is like I want to be a business owner. I already am a business owner, but I want to teach other people these things. And in order to do that, I need to learn more, whether it's like credit repair techniques, or investing, and whether that's investing in your own business ideas, investing in real estate, and investing in the stock market even. And I know people might not like that idea, but like really, I think for me, I know I need to be open-minded if I want to achieve any kind of financial success, because something that's important to me is like my older brother passed away, and my older brother was murdered, and unfortunately he was not able to leave anything to my nieces and nephews. You know what I mean? Like he didn't have any assets. He had no money really. And I'm like, man, I don't want that to keep happening to Native families. You know what I mean? So if I can do anything about it, I'm going to do my best to set myself up to leave something behind for my children as well as theirs, and so on. Because, we have this thing we talk about as Native people, like we have to think about the 7 generations ahead. We have to think about the 7 generations ahead, not just about ourselves. So if we are going to think about the 7 generations ahead, financial literacy has to be a part of that. So that's one major entrepreneurial thing I'm interested in, and I've been studying a lot lately. And then another thing is like I said, I became a permit to carry instructor in Minnesota. And, I've got some interesting ways I could even maybe try to incorporate music into that. I mean, that could be a unique way I engage with people who are fans of my music. Like some of y'all know about Twista. He's an MC from Chicago. He actually became a permit to carry instructor and started but he started doing these classes, and I seen the advertisement, and he said, well, one of the benefits of taking his classes, you get to hear a song that he wrote about permit to carry knowledge and, firearm safety knowledge and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, that's pretty dope, so that's another thing I've thought about, incorporating into that business of educating people on the safe handling and defensive uses of firearms, and it's important to me because I grew up and I had traumatic experiences with firearms. Like I seen people shot. I had a shotgun pulled on me one time, and it was just never a positive image of firearms, and rightfully so. But what I've learned is that, especially in these times of uprising, and I'm here in Minneapolis where George Floyd passed, and the uprising that was here, it was crazy. Like I've never seen anything like it. The military was in the streets. We're sitting there hitting the cut, ducking and dodging military convoys in the city. Like it's wild. So that taught me is like people of color, minorities, we need to become literate with firearms as well. Um, I think it would only benefit us to do so. It's not for purposes of going out and murdering somebody or nothing like that. It's to see it as a tool that can protect your babies, that can protect yourself. To see it simply as a tool of protection and nothing more or less. So that's what I'm about, is trying to expand the gun education, I guess you could say, within communities of color. Because right now, the way things are, all these European Americans are very literate with firearms, and we aren't, because we have such a negative perception of them. And like I said, that's rightfully so. But we got to expand our minds a little bit and think about how we're going to protect ourselves if things hit the fan or whatnot.
Okay. I have another question here. Do you do anything with foster care, children in foster care, raising awareness to children in foster care in Minnesota, or do you have any involvement with those kinds of issues?
I don't, not a lot. It is something that I would speak on more intimately with like Native youth who I know are dealing with it, but I haven't been engaged in any kind of like, I haven't fostered any children myself or anything like that. I know I was scheduled to perform and speak at a conference here in Minnesota back in like August, but it got canceled due to the pandemic. But it would have been like all foster students, and I was really looking forward to that. But unfortunately, it got canceled. But yeah, I guess beyond like the intimate conversations I might have with different youth I've worked with who I knew were in foster care, being able to share my story with them and like, encourage them to keep their heads up, I'm not like engaged in that any further extent than that, I guess.
Okay. Um, One last reminder for our audience here before I ask you the last question and we wrap up is that tomorrow students at Virginia Tech, particularly members of Native at VT, will have an opportunity to sit down with Tall Paul for about an hour or so to chat about a variety of different things. So if you're interested in partaking in that conversation, make sure you send me an email at I'll put it in the chat box actually, and I'll get you the link. And if you have any last questions, please send them in here. And one of the last questions I have for you is, if you were speaking to a Native artist, and maybe this does happen in real life too, and they were asking you for advice, what is the best piece of advice you think you can give a Native artist that's trying to move into the rap industry or hip hop industry?
To just to be yourself, to not try to like portray an image other than who you are. To be yourself, whether that's speaking on Native issues or not, whatever it is, like be yourself is what I would say, because there's a space for everyone, and I found that to be true. I found that to be true for myself. Like all I've had to do is be myself and rap about the things that were important to me, and I generated, support. And I've been privileged to travel around the country and even outside of the country a little bit as an artist and make a living doing it. So I think you'll be most successful if you just be yourself.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And it looks like we are just about out of questions here. I have opened up the chat box. It's now open. I like to open it towards the end of the event so people can send in their applauds and congratulations. That's one of the negative parts of being in an online environment where you can't hear the roaring applause from everyone. But please take a moment if you'd like to send congratulations or anything in the chat box. And with that, the American Indian and Indigenous Community Center at Virginia Tech thanks you, Tall Paul, for joining us, but also all the viewers for stepping in and listening to this wonderful conversation. And hopefully you all found it inspiring as we wrap up Native Heritage Month here at Virginia Tech. Thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you soon.
All right, thank y'all. If anybody wants to connect on social media or anything, I'll put my social media handle in the chat box as well. It's at Tall Paul 612, but I'll just type it in there too if anybody wants to follow or anything. And that's for all social media platforms, so like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot, whatever you use. It's Tall Paul 612. And thank y'all for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I'm putting in my email here too, so you can send me an email if you'd like to come meet with Tall Paul tomorrow. The meeting will be, I believe it is at 2 p.m. And I will see you all tomorrow or see you soon. Thank you all very much. Thank you again, Tall Paul, and see you all soon.
I wish.